So that's like a quick sharing of my journey through Alzheimer's with my grandfather. Now I want to share with you a bit of about what it's like for the person who has Alzheimer's. What is their story? What is their journey? And the first question I like to ask people is, do you know what it's like to lose your mind? And all the mothers in the audience think, oh, I had little kids. Yeah, I know what it's like to lose my mind. Now, I don't mean lose your mind in that sense. I mean, do you know what it's like to forget how to use a light switch? And that was one of the earliest things we noticed when we started realizing something was really wrong with Grandpa. He started having trouble understanding how the light switch worked. And do you know what it's like to not remember how to use a faucet? Do you know what it's like to forget how to put on your pants? Do you know what it's like to sit in your living room and not remember where the bathroom is? None of us knows really fully what it's like to lose your mind until we start going through that journey of Alzheimer's for ourselves. We can read books about it and learn something, and that is very good. And we can watch someone else going through that journey and lose something, and that is good as well. But we can never fully understand what that is like unless we're going through it ourselves. We look at someone who's facing Alzheimer's, who's losing their mind, and we say of them, oh, they're like a stranger in a strange land because the world is becoming so strange around them. And that is true. But as a caregiver, as a loved one watching them, we are also a stranger in a strange land because we don't fully know what they're going through. And that should teach us to be humble, to be gentle, and to be compassionate. Now, there's many things you can learn from the Alzheimer's journey. There's many things you can learn from watching someone who has to face Alzheimer's. But I want to share with you one thing that I think is really important. And that comes to another excerpt from my book. Everybody knows Alzheimer's is about forgetting. That reality eclipses another important truth. With all that is lost, few understand that in Alzheimer's one can still learn. To be sure, the things remembered are dwarfed by the things forgotten, and the things learned do not measure up to what was once known. But the gains are still meaningful, and in the context of Alzheimer's ravages, perhaps all the more meaningful. It seems contradictory. Isn't forgetting the opposite of learning? We think they can't both have a part, and yet they can and they do. For the person with Alzheimer's, it is about learning how to live with forgetting. How difficult the journey of Alzheimer's becomes depends in a large part on how well both the caregiver and the sick learn to deal with the forgetting. For the person with Alzheimer's, the learning how to deal with forgetting begins long before any outsider is aware of it. There are subtle habits, perhaps even unconscious at first, developed to cope with the first problems of forgetting. Then the disease grows worse and becomes obvious. The person with Alzheimer's stops old activities or changes his daily routine because things he used to do, he can no longer remember how to do. It is easy for the observer to simply think that the person forgot and no longer remembered that they used to do the particular activity. But in my experience of caring for Grandpa, he forgot how to do something, like use the bathroom, long before the memory that it was supposed to be done was also lost. And that was a huge thing for Grandpa. For a long time, he knew he was supposed to use the bathroom when he had to go, but he couldn't remember how the bathroom worked. And he would struggle sometimes for hours trying to figure out how him and the bathroom were supposed to interact. One time he called Grandma in. He said, "Hey, Ma, come here." And so she came into the bathroom, and he said to her, How do I pump water from there?" He pointed at the sink. He said, "How do I pump it over into there?" And he pointed at the toilet. And Grandma looked at him, and she said, "You don't, Pa." And he said, "Well, then how am I going to take a crap?" He got all these amazingly convoluted ideas of how to get the bathroom to work together so that all of a sudden he wouldn't have to go anymore. And it's because he no longer could understand how his body was supposed to interact with things in there. And sometimes he'd be standing there, he'd be just dancing on his feet. He had to go so bad, and he couldn't. And you'd be like, "Grandpa, you pulled on your pants." He'd be like, "I'm trying." He'd be grabbing the edge of the sink. I'm trying. He'd try to pull the sink. And you're like, "Oh, my Lord." And eventually, he might finally remember, his brain might finally come unstuck, and like, oh, and then he'd do it, or sometimes he'd just go on himself. And he'd be so frustrated, because it wasn't that he forgot that he needed to go in the bathroom, he forgot how. The person who is learning well how to deal with their Alzheimer's stops an activity because they realize they cannot do it. The person who is not learning how to deal with their Alzheimer's will keep trying and always end up in frustrated failure. Grandpa didn't simply wake up one morning and forget how to live his life. It was a process of forgetting, but also a process of learning how to let go. Independence is a difficult thing to give up, and it should not be quickly taken from someone either. When facing Alzheimer's, the caregiver can become so fixated on the fact that the Alzheimer's victim is forgetting that they fail to help the person through the steps of learning how to deal with that forgetting. I tried to avoid that trap. My goal was to be with Grandpa wherever he was at in the process, not force the end result on him before he was ready. It is hard for a person to learn that they're forgetting everything. For Grandpa, sometimes the learning wasn't precisely acceptance, just resignation. The process wasn't always smooth for Grandpa and me. There were times and situations where he struggled long and hard, like with using the bathroom. Other times he accepted his losses with better grace. It is natural to imagine that all the things in life which are hard to learn, such as math, science, or playing a musical instrument, are the beautiful and great things. But I think harder than all of these is learning and accepting the reality of forgetting. In its own way, navigating the process and accepting the disease of forgetting requires as much grace and skill as a concert musician. Grandpa took the battles on his terms, with his own frailties and strengths. While helping him in that great battle, I tried to recognize and cherish the small accomplishments. I tried to acknowledge the victories for what they were. They may have been unimportant things, but for me, the little victories were reminders that Grandpa still interacted with the world. What Alzheimer's takes and what it leaves is a mystery. As important as it is to care for those ravaged by the losses of Alzheimer's, it is equally important to recognize the things gained or held in spite of those losses. Respect is an important part of caring for someone with Alzheimer's.